all of this looks good. We solved all the problems, right? Like we solved the trust problem. Ace chain can be heterogeneous, can do whatever. You have mechanisms for both when you trust them, when you don't trust them, when interests are aligned or not aligned. So everything is good. Well, everything is not good if you zoom out even further. I have this complicated picture that took me a long time to draw. And the title is basically we get a fragmented ecosystem. When you do assets, when you're looking at cross-chain asset transfers, user stories, actual real case user stories that are, let's say, more complex, not as simple as going from point to point or going from one asset to a reserve, things start to break down rapidly in terms of UX and experience. UX, I guess. So I have here an example where John wants to balance part of his portfolio from Stellar Swap on Moonbeam. So he has a portfolio of cryptocurrency in liquidity farms on Stellar Swap on Moonbeam. And he heard about this new DEX hydration, or maybe not new, but he heard about some promotion on hydration where he might get better liquidity rewards if he were to provide liquidity on hydration. So he says, okay, I'm not going to move everything. I'm going to move some of my portfolio there and balance my investments or something like that. Right? So it's a real world use case kind of thing. So he says, John, okay, I want to transfer some of my BNC, some of my DOT, some of my Glimmer, and some of my HDX over from Stellar Swap on Moonbeam to hydration. So how do these transfers have to go? Well, like we said, looking at the chains themselves, you have Moonbeam, you have Bifrost. Bifrost here is basically where BNC comes from. Hydration, where HDX come from. There's like Moonbeam and Hydration are also the source and final destination. And the relay chain, because that's where DOT comes from. So I'm putting the relay chain here as just kind of a reserve for DOT, not related to the actual, consensus or anything like that. Now, all of these chains, if you look at them, they're differently colored. And that's also to show that their interests are not aligned, right? They are sovereign chains governed by different entities. They all of them in these particular ones all implement some sort of open gov with different shareholders, right? So their interests are not aligned, and we cannot trust teleports between them. So you have to do reserve transfers. Now, if you want to do reserve transfers, we just discussed earlier how for each asset has to go through one of its reserves, so that the actual thing happens correctly. So DOT transfer has to go through the relay chain. BNC transfer has to go through Bifrost chain. Glimmer and HDX can go straight from Moonbeam to hydration because Glimmer is the native asset of Moonbeam and HDX is a native asset of hydration. So these two guys can go like in one step in a single message where you kind of do the two transfers we saw earlier, but you can actually combine them in the same step in the same message, and do a reserve deposit of 42 Glimmer and a reserve withdrawal of 43 HDX. But this can happen at once. But then this message that has to go through the relay chain cannot happen in the same message because it has a different path, and so it's a different message. It's a different step. It's a different action that needs to happen, right? And the same with the one on the bottom here. And now this example is also look complicated, but in reality it's even more complicated than that because we haven't even factored in paying fees. On this chain you have to pay fees using something, on this chain do something else, on this chain do something else, and so on and so forth. So it becomes like a huge pain in the ass. And even without looking at fees, you can see that John's user experience is now fragmented. He was looking at his portfolio on his application in Moonbeam, and he said, "Okay, I want to send this to hydration and use that other DEX." Right? He doesn't know internal blockchain details or like trust assumptions or blockchain sovereignty or like all of this advanced stuff that we're talking about. He doesn't know that he has to do a reserve transfer. All of this needs to be like abstracted away from the user. And in this example here, it's kind of not, because you are forcing him to send dot through a separate transfer, send these two things through a separate transfer, and send this last thing to a separate transfer. And he doesn't understand why. And he's like, what the hell is happening here? So yeah, we get fragmented UX. Going further, this kind of fragmentation comes from what we discussed earlier, which is kind of the chain sovereignty and the trust issues that you have to contend with once you offer chains their own sovereignty, right? So we want to do that, but we have these challenges that come out of it, right? I'm not saying we shouldn't be doing that. It's a very powerful thing to do. I'm just raising awareness on these challenges, and then we're going to get into how Asset Hub helps. Now, we discussed sovereignty. I'm going to touch on heterogeneity here. And heterogeneity is also leading to a lot of fragmentation in terms of integrations. And by heterogeneity, if you remember from the beginning of the presentation, is that every chain can look different, right? It can be its own shape and color. It can have its own on-chain logic, wildly different than other chains. Even on the node side, it can be wildly different. The only requirement is that it still follows the same Parachain protocol, right? The Polkadot Parachain protocol, right? But that's part of what nodes do, right? On the things like RPCs or the cryptography used or anything, all sorts of things. It can be infinitely customized. And the end result is that all of these dots here kind of look different in our ecosystem. And that's a challenge and a problem when you start integrating with the outer world. So everything within Polkadot ecosystem, you say, okay, we have solutions for everything. We built XCM in the Parachain protocol, providing, block creation consensus, block finalization consensus, all that other stuff. But then you start integrating with the rest of the world. And by the rest of the world, I'm just using some examples here. It's like on-off ramps, right? How do people get from real-world fiat into some assets on some blockchain? You have centralized exchanges on the right here. And you have some bridges on top here. Bridges meaning ways to connect or like integrate with other blockchains, other blockchains outside of the Polkadot ecosystem, right? Because within the Polkadot ecosystem, we already have kind of all of this figured out through the Polkadot consensus and Parachain messaging protocol. But outside, you need custom solutions, so to speak. So what happens in practice is that all of these integrations are fragmented, massively fragmented if you look at the ecosystem layer. If you zoom out and look at the whole ecosystem. So for example, centralized exchanges, they integrate some chains in the Polkadot ecosystems, but not all chains, right? And by some chains, I mean very few chains. And then you have a shit ton of centralized exchanges, and you have some exchanges integrating some chains while other exchanges integrate some other chains. And basically, this is actually very simplified. In reality, there's like a craziness of arrows here that go from one place to another, but there's no uniformity. And basically, this happens because looking at this example of centralized exchanges or even on-off ramps, but let's look at the example of centralized exchanges. I need to pick one, so I'm picking checks. When they integrate with a chain, they have to operate some nodes, operate some software, develop some software, operate some software, blah, 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 everything. So this costs time and money, and it costs hundreds of thousands of dollars a year, right? So it's a huge cost to integrate with a different chain, with another chain, and another chain, and another chain, right? And they only do it if you like pay them a shit ton of money, or like if they have things to gain by integrating, right? So it would integrate with Moonbeam for free without Moonbeam having to pay them, because Glimmer is so popular that they would have a lot of volume of transaction that they get fees out of, and they're making a profit basically, right? The same with bridges. You have some parachains that implemented and integrated bridges, but that bridge only takes you to that parachain, doesn't take you to the whole other ecosystem. You have to go to like all these hops, and also the things that are going over that link in terms of assets. We're talking about assets here, right? The whole of this is focused on assets. We're talking about Asset Hub. Is also fragmented, right? So maybe this bridge only supports like Glimmer, Rapteth, and USDT, right? It definitely doesn't support, I don't know, True from Crust. So Crust, even though it's like connected through the Polkadot ecosystem to Moonbeam and then to this bridge, the bridge here doesn't support Crust because Moonbeam or whoever built this bridge, Wormhole or whoever didn't care about Crust, or like didn't invest in also adding Crust support, especially to Moonbeam, so that it goes over this bridge. These examples are purely theoretical. I'm not really sure what each of these links actually support. Like this is like a theoretical example, but very specific to the problem we have. So as you can see, different chains, heterogeneous chains, really cool, allows you to do a million stuff, but also provides or like results in a fragmented ecosystem in terms of integrating with the real world, or with anything outside the Polkadot ecosystem. Then, again, an example of fragmented ecosystem. The Turing test, I call this the meme coin test. So this year in March, and you can see here in March 29, there was this famous tweet thread, at least famous in the Polkadot, ecosystem. Came from Jakub Panik, which is the CTO of Hydration, and it was around how to, not necessarily how to, but describing the experience of doing something with your meme coins. So basically, pink meme coin was airdropped to all the users of the Polkadot ecosystem, and the delivery method of choice by the pink team was to, because they couldn't, let's say, look at every user on every parachain and figure out how much every user deserves. They said, okay, we can look at all the just the parachains and say this parachain makes up maybe 30% of the whole Polkadot ecosystem. So we give them 30% of pink, and then 5%, 8%, 9%, whatever. And then the parachain itself is responsible for distributing that further as an airdrop to its own users, depending on their own metrics of usage or whatever. Right? So Jakub, because he was using Bifrost probably, also got an airdrop of pink on Bifrost. And he wanted to basically move it to Hydration, to HydraRX, now called Hydration, and create a pool with a new create isolate tools feature. This is like a specific thing, not really relevant to this, but basically it wasn't good. And these are the steps that you had to, or he had to, or one has to do to get pink from Bifrost to Hydration. So they need dot, and you need dot because some. Okay, let's not start with dot. Let's start with. So first of all, you need BNC because Bifrost is like the starting point, right? So you need BNC. Pink itself has the reserve of its reserve is Asset Hub. So the message has to go from Bifrost to Asset Hub to HydraRX. Now, the only asset that is allowed to pay fees for all of these three things is USDT. So you need this USDT. Also, Asset Hub used to charge, or like still charges, but let's say that's a feature that's not a bug, an enhancement not yet delivered. But at that point, it needed DOT for XCM transport fees. So it could do USDT for execution fees, but it needed DOT for transport fees. So you also need DOT. You need USDC, you need BNC, because you need it on Bifrost BNC. I don't know why. I think you might have done it with USDT, but Bifrost didn't support USDT at that point. Okay. And so all of this stuff that you need now is coming from that fragmented asset transfer and reserves that I presented earlier, but it even goes one step further. And in how do people get this stuff? And talking about now integrations, well, you get them from some centralized exchange or some on-off ramp, right? So you buy DOT from Binance, but you have to send that to the relay chain. So because Binance only integrates with the relay chain. So you send that to the relay chain, and then from the relay chain, you have to send it to Asset Hub. You buy USDT, and you buy that from Binance because you had an account on Binance anyway, and you can send that directly to Asset Hub because it integrates with Asset Hub. You buy BNC. I don't know if they have BNC of Binance, so probably you're using OKX, Coinbase, something else, for BNC. And you send that to Bifrost because that's the only thing that integrates BNC, right? So Binance or whatever checks only supports BNC integration with Bifrost, right? Doesn't care about these other things. You have to then send the USDT from Asset Hub to Bifrost. I don't know why you need to do. Oh, you need to do this to include it in the actual transfer. And then, so you do like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and then 9 steps, right? These are independent steps that were using different tools, different sites, different wallets, and it's just really fun. So does everybody get a sense of the UX fragmentation pain that we are feeling at the ecosystem level once we're looking at real actual ecosystem level use cases? I can feel you going, woohoo, yay.
Good. Yeah, makes sense. Makes sense. The entire explanation, at least to me.
Good. Now, we want to, this is taking longer than I expected. I hope I have time to go through everything. So we want to solve this. We want to solve this without sacrificing any of the stuff we said we like, but also is causing problems for us. But we like them anyway, because of a million other reasons. So we don't want to sacrifice chain heterogeneity or the sovereignty. So the solution, right? Maybe not the only solution, one solution, is have this common good chain. It's called Asset Hub system chain. Or basically, it's called Asset Hub, but it's a system chain. And by being a system chain, basically, it's owned and governed by OpenGov, the Polkadot OpenGov. So you can extend it the same consideration of trust as to the relay chain. So basically, what that means is that any parachain have to trust the relay chain anyway, because the relay chain is the one that's offering them the security, right? And the relay chain interests are aligned not to cheat on its parachains, because what good is a relay chain if it cheats on its own parachains? So interests are aligned here, right? So parachains know that the relay chain won't cheat them, so they can trust the relay chain, so they trust OpenGov, and the same trust can be extended to Asset Hub, right? Because Asset Hub is a system chain owned by OpenGov. OpenGov body, governance body, will not start messing with Asset Hub assets without shooting themselves in the foot in the process. So basically, by having this Asset Hub as a system chain means that all the parachains trust it equally, right? Now, one of the first things that were launched on Asset Hub were externally owned or ecosystem-owned assets. So basically, we talked about assets which are specific to certain parachains. But then you have assets which you say, this asset is specific to the whole of the ecosystem, not just this parachain. It doesn't derive its value from this parachain or this parachain. It derives its value from the whole ecosystem. So example here are these meme coins like Pink and Dead. They're like ecosystem-wide coins, right? or you have externally owned stable coins like USDT, USDC. These are assets that derive their value from some external trust-based company, right? It's an actual company, you know, USDT, like, or Circle for USDC. And these, if you like put them on Asset Hub and you provide the control, like the asset owner there for USDT is like this Tether company, and for USDC is this Circle company, then you know, no, I'm trusting it. I can extend the same level of trust for USDC across the whole ecosystem, and this trust that I'm putting in the Circle company is not influenced by any parachain intentions or like interests, because it's basically, it lives on this system chain, right? So basically it's like Moonbeam, goes into, frenzy mode, like its governance says, let the world burn. It cannot mess up USDT because USDT is controlled by an owner on Asset Hub. This owner being the Tether company. So that was the first thing where Asset Hub was very useful. And then we have this very powerful new concept. New as in it's been around for almost a year now, as in deployed, but it's not been integrated across the ecosystem yet. We have limited integrations with it yet, as of now, and I'm hoping that this webinar will actually drive this the integrations here. So through foreign assets, Asset Hub kind of participates in each of these different parachains trust zone. So in a way, each of the parachains get a slice of trust within Asset Hub. So let's look at that visually. I try to make all of this stuff as visual as possible. So you have Asset Hub. First of all, on the right here is the assets that we discussed earlier, which are like, we call this trust-based assets. You have they're owned by some owner, right? And you trust that owner, right? So it's the Tether company, the Circle company, or in case of Pink and Dead, they were owned by the coin creator, but then the coin creator showed that it basically killed its account, so that it became ownerless, right? So nobody can mess with the issuance anymore, right? So these are like, we call them trust-based assets. And then we have these foreign assets. Now these foreign assets are basically assets that are registered by the owners, by their natural owners, and we identify their natural owners by their location. So first of all, the identifier for these assets is the actual location. So for Inter, its identifier is like the interlay parachain, because that's the what do you call origin of this asset. This is where it was created. That's the default reserve for it anyway, all right? And now, as you can see, all of these are color-coded as in the same color as they're basically owning parachains. And when I say owning parachains, I mean these parachains actually own the logic of issuance and anything management. So they basically own the management of these assets. So they're, first of all, they're permissionless created. So any parachain can register a foreign asset as long as its ID matches the location it's the parachain that's is trying to register it. So that way, Mythos can register Myth as the owner, but it cannot register Peak, because Peak has an ID location that is pointing to this other parachain, right? So it's permissionless in the sense that any parachain can just create their own foreign asset. And then they manage it remotely through XCM. And it's by manage it remotely, I mean they own and control it completely, right? So they own how much can get burnt, minted, what's the issuance, what's the supply on this chain, everything like that, right? So, like I said earlier, what happens is you get sort of a trusted slice of the asset hub, right? Meaning that this part, like this part here, in the case of Myth of Asset Hub, it's under your control. So you trust it completely. And you know that the code of Asset Hub does not allow anyone else to control this slice. It's yours. Like, nobody can touch it. It's like fully yours. What this then implies or like allows is that assets, these on this basically trust slices, assets can be teleported, right? So Mythos can teleport Myth between itself and Asset Hub. Peak can teleport its Peak token between itself and Asset Hub. It cannot teleport the FA token, right? It's a reserve transfer with the reserve on FALA or on Asset Hub, but it's through this same color, right? It can be teleported because the interests are aligned. Like nobody can control Peak here other than the Peak parachain, and the Peak parachain trusts kind of itself, right? So it trusts this extension of itself. And then the other really cool thing that happens is that Asset Hub can act as the reserve of said asset for the whole ecosystem. Meaning what? Meaning Interlay, if he wants to get some FALA, any FALA coming in or out has to go through a reserve of FALA. And that reserve is, or always has been, FALA Parachain. But now it can say, you know what? I can use Asset Hub as the reserve for FALA. Because, it's still here. It's still practically using the same trust. The liquidity is split now between these two things. Both of them are valid reserve locations. And that means any bubble in the ecosystem can use Asset Hub as a reserve for any asset registered as a foreign asset.
Adrian, I have two questions here.
Yep.
The first one is, how do you actually manage the liquidity of the asset between these two places? I mean, how can you ensure that FALA always has tokens on Asset Hub and not only on their own chain? That's the first one. And the second one is, how can we get more people to use this? And also, especially like for new teams joining the ecosystem that are trying to get used to this, if there's anything that we can do with, I don't know, the templates that OpenSepl is building or anything like that to sort of like have this as a default configuration, if you wish, on all these parachains that join.
Yep. So the first question, how do you manage liquidity? So when you create through the permissionless creation mechanism, basically a call that you can do, and everything is validated by the Asset Hub logic there. The code there, all the code on Asset Hub is trusted by every parachain because, like we said, it's trusted. And the code to create a foreign asset also verifies that you're allowed to create that foreign asset. So basically, is the asset ID that you're trying to create matching the location of the entity that's trying to create it? Okay, it's matching. Then okay, Peak can create Peak then. So first of all, they create it, and when they create it, it's like zero balance, zero liquidity, right? And then once it's been created, all you have to do is teleport. And now it's in the control of the governing body of Peak to decide how they split their full liquidity between Peak and Asset Hub. In practice, what needs to happen is that the parachain needs to seed some liquidity on Asset Hub and then just let users do their thing, right? And then naturally you're gonna see where more users of your token are on Asset Hub or on the actual parachain, and liquidity will just flow naturally, right? If a user has Peak on the Peak parachain, but it's more useful to the user on Asset Hub, they'll just teleport it to Asset Hub. So you don't have to worry about liquidity or like manage it yourself. Once the mechanism is put in place to allow natural, basically, movement of liquidity.
Okay.
Does that make sense? Yeah.
Yeah, I still need to wrap my head around it because I don't know. Let's say that I'm a user. I have my PIC tokens on the PIC Parachain, and I want to use Binance. And let's assume that Binance supports all the assets on Asset Hub, right? For a minute, and I want to just get them off Binance. Well, I guess the integration there, Binance, what would do is, if I have balance on Asset Hub, just get the balance. If not, just teleport this asset from PIC to Binance. Okay, exactly. Yeah, okay.
Exactly. So
okay. I think I got it. Yeah.
Yeah, we're gonna get into the next slide exactly with this integrations, how Asset Hub helps. But basically, you stolen the start there, and that is, once you integrate Binance to Asset Hub, then every foreign asset on Asset Hub gets automatically integrated with Binance. So basically, Binance didn't have integration with PIC, but now, and you were using PIC, and all your funds were on PIC, like you say, and you want to use Binance, you see, okay, I can use Binance to Asset Hub, so just move my funds, like manually move them here, and then move them, use Asset Hub, use Binance or some other checks. Yeah, and it's similar to having banks, right? To managing your accounts across banks, right? You can think of these chains as maybe different entities. So you have money in your bank A and in your bank B. You have money in both accounts coming in from different sources, multiple streams of income, and then you want to withdraw some cash to go on vacation or something, and you have an ATM downstairs from bank A. What do? Open up your phone, move some funds from B to A, go to the ATM and get them out. The same flow can be applied here, and it's not a strange flow. It's an easy model to wrap your mind around because it has real world equivalence, right? So someone coming into this blockchain ecosystem can draw parallels and figure out naturally what they need to do.
Got it. Thank you. And then for like new people joining, can we make this a default behavior somehow?
Yeah. So how to make this happen? This is definitely going to have its own session. It's a very important topic on how does one integrate as a builder their asset into foreign assets? How does a new builder launching a new parachain make sure that it configures it from the day one to work with foreign assets? All of this stuff we'll have to cover in a dedicated session. But to how do we get more adoption of this mechanism is just to raising awareness of the benefits. Like, I'm hoping this presentation is a good step in this direction. And as we move ahead to the last slides, you see all the benefits come together. And the other things that we're targeting is like I said, one, raise awareness, and the other, make it easier to configure, like lower the barriers on the technical side, add more documentation, add better documentation, yeah, things like that. There's no magic solution. It's just everybody needs to work towards this.
Perfect.
Cool. The other thing that we discussed with where we had a lot of fragmentation was integrations, right? And at least from the point of assets exposure, Asset Hub, as the name suggests, is a great proxy. So now if you look at a similar picture of integrations with the world, on-off ramps, checks, bridges, etc., you can see that you can, as an ecosystem, we can start adding integration to Asset Hub, right, as this common good chain, and then automatically get exposure for all the assets from the ecosystem, which are also registered on Asset Hub. So you have the native, kind of the native or the trust-based assets, which are already kind of native to Asset Hub. But through foreign assets, you can have any other asset from the ecosystem that is now using Asset Hub, but without the owner of that asset relinquishing control in any way, right? They still control, they have full control and governance over that asset. And yeah, this is what it's showing. So basically, when you have a new on-off ramp integrated with Asset Hub, at least all of the technical challenges of integrating with a blockchain have been surpassed, right? So Transact as a company has integrated the blockchain, right? And now they only have to manage a list of assets, all following the same specification protocol, you know, a code kind of thing, but it just varying parameters. Right? It just varies the name and color, but behind the scenes they all work the same. So, you know, when I want to allow in Binance, you know, this purple asset, then it's very easy for me. It's just calling the same function that I wrote in Binance to also allow this green asset, or like expose this green asset, or the brown one, or the orange one, or whatever, right? So I integrate once, spend the money once, or pay the price once, but then get all of these things, or like have access to all of these things. And it's also good to look at it the other way around. The external world has access to all of these things, and all of these things have exposure to the external world. Same with bridges. We have, you know, Snow Bridge, Ethereum Bridge integrated with Asset Hub, Polkadot Bridge integrated with Asset Hub. That offers, like, not necessarily out of the box, like zero effort exposure, but it offers a very shortcut into getting integrated with, like, you don't have to build your own bridge or integrate with like a full bridge. You just have to do some configuration stuff and, you know, make use of the bridge already integrated. And now coming back to the example that I had before with the balancing portfolio from Teleswap to Hydration. Since now Glimmer, BNC.Glimmer HDX, they're all foreign assets on Asset Hub, means that Asset Hub alone can act as a reserve for them. That means John's wallet offers him a simple one-button action where he just clicks and signs just one XCM message that goes to Asset Hub and then to Hydration and does everything within the same program, right? The program is still sort of doing the same things as before, but it doesn't have to, you don't have to have multiple programs that go to multiple places. You have a unified flow, right? So what it will do is it will teleport Glimmer, because between Moonbeam and Asset Hub, Glimmer is the same asset, it's teleportable. But then it has to reserve withdraw .hdx and BNC, right? Because this is the reserve of them, and Moonbeam only had a derivative. For DOT and BNC, these two things that are withdrawn from this reserve are then deposited to Hydration's reserve, and then, you know, part of the message sent forward, it will also say, you know, I deposited 41 DOT and 44 BNC. The Glimmer that was teleported here, so it's minted and then also deposited to this sovereign account. So it's part of this reserve deposited message. And the kind of mirroring thing here is you reserved withdraw the HDX, and it gets burnt here and deposited. No, it gets burnt here because it's basically teleported over to Hydration. So it gets burnt here and minted here directly without any other intermediate reserve accounts. So this still looks complicated, but the good news is it can now be, so it's complicated as at the implementation level, and it's already implemented. Everything just like today works, right? So any foreign asset that's currently registered in Asset Hub, you can do that today. You just call pallet XCM transfer assets, and it just figures out everything it needs to do, right? What teleport where is the reserve, blah, 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 blah. So that means on the UX, on the user experience, you can offer a one-click solution, right? And mentally, they don't have to worry about like where does this asset come from, what it's reserved, and everything. And that was it, right on time. I don't know how that happened.